The baby would not stop screaming. Not crying, screaming. The kind of scream that made grown men flinch, that made a flight attendant drop a tray of drinks in the aisle, that made every head in first class turn toward the man in the black coat who sat frozen, holding a 6-month-old girl like she might shatter in his hands. Kang Min-ho had negotiated with men who carried knives under their tongues. He had stood in rooms where silence meant someone was about to die, and he had never once looked away. But right now, at 39,000 feet, holding his daughter Sua against his chest, he looked like a man who had never been more powerless in his life. "Sir, please," the flight attendant said, her voice tight with panic. "Other passengers are—" "I know." His voice was flat, controlled, the voice of a man who gave orders that were never questioned. But his hands were shaking. "I know." He had tried everything. The bottle, the pacifier, rocking her, walking her up and down the narrow aisle while 2 of his men watched from their seats. Useless. Terrified of a baby in a way they had never been terrified of a rival syndicate. He had tried singing badly, in a voice that hadn't sung anything since his mother died. Nothing worked. Sua's small face was red, her fists balled tight, her cries tearing through the cabin like something was ripping inside her. 3 rows back, a woman closed her book. Her name was Amara Chakwamika, 31 years old, a maternity nurse from Enugu who had spent the last 6 years in delivery rooms in Lagos and, more recently, in a trauma ward in Houston. She had heard thousands of babies cry. She could tell the difference between hungry cry, tired cry, scared cry, and something is wrong cry the way a mechanic could tell an engine's trouble by sound alone. This was not tired cry. This was not hungry cry. This was fear. She unbuckled her seatbelt before she had fully decided to move. "Ma'am, please remain seated," the flight attendant said as Amara stood. "I'm a nurse," Amara said simply, already walking. "Let me help." Kang Min-ho looked up as she approached, and for a moment something flickered across his face. The instinct of a man who trusted no one, who had built an empire on trusting no one, but exhaustion won. Desperation won. He had been awake for 2 days. His daughter's mother was gone, and his child was screaming like the world was ending, and nothing he did could make it stop. "May I?" Amara asked, holding out her arms. He hesitated one more second. Then he placed his daughter into the arms of a stranger, because there was nothing left to lose. Amara didn't rock the baby the way everyone else had. She turned Sua gently, laid her stomach down along her forearm, applied firm, steady pressure to the baby's chest and back, and began to hum. Low, rhythmic, a sound from somewhere deep in her own childhood, a lullaby her grandmother used to sing in Igbo. Sua's cries hitched, stumbled, and then, in the space of 30 seconds, stopped. The cabin, which had been holding its breath for the better part of an hour, exhaled all at once. Somewhere behind them, a passenger actually clapped. Kang Min-ho stared at his daughter, silent now, blinking up at the stranger holding her, and something in his chest cracked open in a way he did not have language for. "How?" he said. It wasn't even a full question. It was disbelief given sound. "She wasn't hungry," Amara said quietly, still swaying slightly, still humming under her breath. "She was frightened. Babies feel everything we feel, Mr. Kong." "Mr. Kong. She's been picking up on something for hours. Fear doesn't need words to travel from a parent to a child. It just needs proximity." He said nothing, but his eyes moved briefly, involuntarily, to the 2 men seated across the aisle, men who were not reading magazines, who were not sleeping, who had spent the entire flight watching the cabin door the way men watch a door they expect trouble to walk through. Amara noticed. She noticed everything. It was, after all, her job to notice the things people didn't say. She just didn't yet understand what she'd walked into. If this story is already pulling at something in you, drop a comment and tell us I'm still watching. Because what happens next on this flight is going to change everything you think you know about the man in seat 2A. And if you haven't yet, hit subscribe because we tell stories like this every single week. Stories about the moments that quietly rewrite a person's whole life. 6 months earlier, Kang Min-ho had been a different kind of man. Not softer. He had never been soft, but certain. Certain of his world, certain of his rules, certain of the walls he had built around the empire his father left him and the family that lived inside those walls. He ran what outsiders called logistics, and what insiders knew was something far heavier. Shipping routes that moved more than cargo, warehouses in 3 countries that answered only to him, a network of loyalty bought with money and enforced with fear. He had inherited it at 26, when his father was shot outside a restaurant in Busan, and he had spent 13 years making sure no one ever mistook his youth for weakness again. He was good at being feared. He was less good at being anything else. Then he met Hannah. She wasn't part of his world. She was a violinist, of all things, performing at a charity gala he'd attended only because appearances mattered. She didn't know who he was, didn't recognize the way rooms went quiet when he entered them, and when he introduced himself, she simply said, "Okay," and, like his name meant nothing at all. For the first time in a decade, it didn't. Not to her. He fell for her the way men like him weren't supposed to be allowed to fall for anyone. Completely, recklessly, in a way that terrified him more than any rival ever had. She didn't ask questions about his work. She pretended not to notice the men who followed him at a careful distance, the way meetings sometimes ended with him leaving in the middle of dinner, jaw tight, phone pressed to his ear. She loved him anyway, or loved the version of him he let her see. And when she told him she was pregnant, he did something he had not done since he was a boy. He cried. Soo-ah was born on a spring morning, and for 4 months, Kang Min-ho actually believed, that he could hold 2 lives at once. The empire in one hand, his daughter and the woman he loved in the other. He believed, foolishly, that a man could keep his family separate from his sins. He was wrong. He had learned that lesson once before, 13 years earlier, kneeling on wet pavement outside a restaurant in Busan with his father's blood soaking through the knees of his school uniform. He had been 26, not a boy, but young enough that grief still felt like something that could be outrun. His father had built the organization on a simple rule, repeated to Min-ho so many times it had worn smooth like a river stone. You do not have to love this life, but you must never let this life see you love anything else more. His father had broken his own rule for exactly one person, Min-ho's mother, and had paid for it twice, once when she left him and once when the men who killed him used her memory as leverage in the final negotiation of his life. Min-ho had sworn, kneeling in that blood, that he would never make his father's mistake. He would run the empire the way it needed to be run, efficiently, coldly, without a single soft place an enemy could press a blade into. And then Hannah had looked at him across a gala and asked, "Okay?" And 13 years of certainty had come apart in the space of one conversation. He told himself for a while that he had found a way to do both, to keep the 2 halves of his life in separate rooms that never touched. He was careful. He kept Hannah's name off every document that mattered. He never let his men so much as look at her directly. He believed, the way desperate men believe the things they need to be true, that carefulness was the same as safety. 3 weeks ago, Hannah was killed. Not in an accident. Not by illness. She was killed because someone wanted to send Kang Min-ho a message. And the message was this: nothing you love is safe, and nothing you protect is truly protected, not from us. He had been the one to identify her body. He remembered almost nothing about that hour except the sound of Soo-ah crying in another room. 3 months old, hungry, needing a mother who would never again pick her up, and the way his own hands would not stop shaking when he finally lifted his daughter himself, as if his body understood before his mind could catch up that everything had just permanently changed. He spent the 2 weeks after the funeral doing what he did best, finding answers. He pulled apart shipping manifests, phone records, the movements of every man who reported to him, looking for the seam where his private life had touched his public one. What he found broke something in him more thoroughly than Hannah's death alone had. The information that led the killers to her name, her routine, the address of the apartment he thought no one knew about, had come from inside his own circle. Someone who had eaten at his table, who had held Soo-ah as a newborn, who had sworn the same oath his father's men once swore, had sold that information for a price Min-ho still didn't fully understand. He did not yet know who. He only knew that the walls he had spent 13 years building to keep his family safe had been breached from the inside by someone wearing the same loyalty he had trusted his whole life, and that the safest place for his daughter now was nowhere near anyone who had ever called him boss. If you have ever loved someone so much that losing them rearranged the shape of who you are, you already understand what's sitting underneath every word of this story. Comment below and tell us who you're holding on to a little tighter after hearing this. And if this story has already found its way into your chest, go ahead and subscribe now. We have many more stories like this one waiting for you. He had not cried since the funeral. He had simply gone still, in the particular way dangerous men go still, right before they become something worse. He had sent his daughter to stay with his aunt in the countryside for 2 weeks while he hunted for answers. And when the hunting turned up a name he didn't like, a name belonging to someone inside his own network, someone he had once trusted, he had made a decision that broke every rule he'd built his life on. He was leaving, not just the country, the life. He had one contact left who could get him and Suwa somewhere safe, somewhere his enemies wouldn't think to look, at least not immediately, a private arrangement, a new identity waiting on the other side of an ocean. All he had to do was survive one commercial flight without anyone realizing exactly who was sitting in seat 2A with a baby on his lap. He had not accounted for the possibility that his own daughter's fear would be the thing that gave him away. Amara did not know any of this. She only knew that the baby in her arms had finally fallen asleep, her small fist curled around a fold of Amara's sleeve, and that the father across from her had the eyes of a man who had not slept properly in weeks, and the posture of someone permanently expecting a blow. "Thank you," Kong Minho said again, quieter this time. "I don't know what I would have done." "You'd have figured it out," Amara said. "Parents always do." Eventually wasn't fast enough. He looked at his daughter's sleeping face. "She's all I have left." Something in the way he said it, the finality, the weight, made Amara look at him differently. Not as a difficult passenger, as a man carrying something enormous and trying very hard not to let it show. "Do you want to sit with her a while longer?" he asked. "Or should I?" "I don't mind," Amara said, and meant it. There was something steadying about holding a sleeping child, something that had always felt like the truest part of her work, the part that had nothing to do with charts or shifts or hospital politics. "She's a fighter. I can tell." "She has to be," he said, and there was something underneath the words that Amara couldn't name yet, but filed away instinctively, the way she filed away every small warning sign in every patient she'd ever had. For the next hour they talked. Not about the things that mattered, not yet, but about small things. She told him about growing up in Enugu, about a grandmother who delivered half the babies in her village before Mara was even born, about the trauma ward in Houston where she now worked 12-hour shifts stitching together the aftermath of other people's worst nights. He told her carefully, selectively, that he worked in shipping, that his wife had died recently, that he was traveling to start over somewhere new with his daughter. He did not tell her what kind of new start required 2 armed men and a flight path chosen specifically to avoid certain airports. She noticed the gaps in his story. She had spent a career learning to notice what people didn't say. But she also noticed the way his hand trembled, very slightly, every time he looked at his daughter, and she decided, the way kind people sometimes decide against their own better judgment, that whatever he wasn't telling her, it wasn't her business to demand. She was wrong about that too, though she wouldn't find out how wrong for another 2 hours. It happened during the final descent. One of Kong Minho's men, a broad-shouldered man named Daesung, who had worked for the family since Minho's father was alive, stood up too fast near the rear galley, his hand moving instinctively toward his jacket as another passenger, a man Amara hadn't paid any attention to before, rose from a seat in the back of the cabin and began walking forward with a stillness that didn't belong on a commercial flight. Amara felt it before she understood it, the specific animal quality of danger entering a room. She had felt it before, once in Lagos. The night gunman came through the hospital looking for a rival gang member bleeding out on her table. She recognized the silence that fell over people right before violence, the way conversations died mid-sentence, the way everyone's body angled subtly toward the exits without anyone consciously deciding to move. "Give her to me," Kong Minho said, low and urgent, already reaching for Suwa. His entire posture had changed in the space of one breath, the tired father gone, replaced by something colder, faster, a man recalculating threat and exit routes in real time. What's happening? Amara said, handing the baby over, her nurse's instinct screaming that whatever this was, it was serious, and someone here was about to get hurt. Sit down, he said. Please. Whatever happens, stay in your seat. The man from the back of the plane reached the mid-cabin divider just as Dae-sung stepped into the aisle to block him, and for 3 long seconds nothing happened at all. Just 2 men staring at each other over the heads of confused, frightened passengers. 30,000 feet above the ocean, no possible escape in any direction. If your heart is racing right now the way ours was writing this, comment below and tell us you feel it too. And don't scroll away, because what this stranger says next is the moment that changes the entire story. Kong Minho, the man said, his voice carrying easily through the silent cabin. You didn't really think you could just disappear. This isn't the place, Minho said, his voice a warning wrapped around something close to panic. Not for himself, Amara realized, watching his arms tighten around his daughter, but for her. It's exactly the place, the man said. No one runs. No one gets to just walk away and start a new life while the rest of us clean up what your father left behind. My father is dead. Whatever debt you think exists. Your wife found that debt, the man said, and something about the flatness of his voice, the casual cruelty of it, made the temperature in the cabin seem to drop 10 degrees. And now your daughter is going to grow up learning the same lesson she learned. Amara did not think. She would replay this moment for years afterward and never be able to fully explain what made her move, except that some instinct older than fear told her that a baby's life was about to become a bargaining chip, and every part of her, the nurse, the daughter of a woman who had once shielded her own children from a burning building with nothing but her body, refused to let that happen without a fight. She stood. Sir, she said, stepping half into the aisle, her voice steady in a way that surprised even her. There is a child on this plane. Whatever this is between you, it does not involve her. The man's eyes flicked to her, assessing, dismissive. Sit down. I will not, Amara said. I have spent my whole life bringing children safely into this world, and I am not going to stand by while someone threatens one in front of me. You want to settle something with him? She nodded at Minho. Settle it like a man, not by frightening a baby who has done nothing but exist. For one terrible second, nobody moved. Then, astonishingly, something in the man's expression shifted. Not softened. Men like him didn't soften, but recalculated. A woman with no connection to any of this, standing between him and his target with nothing but conviction, was not part of any plan he had made. And a plane full of witnesses, phones already rising to record, was not the environment for what he'd come to do. This isn't over, he said to Minho, low enough that only the front rows could hear. You know where to find me when you're ready to pay what's owed. He turned and walked back to his seat as if nothing had happened at all, and the cabin exhaled for the second time that flight. Though this exhale carried a different weight, the particular exhaustion of people who had just brushed against something they couldn't name and were desperate to forget. Kong Minho sat down slowly, his daughter still pressed to his chest, his whole body trembling now in a way he no longer tried to hide. You shouldn't have done that, he said to Amara, but his voice cracked on the words. You don't understand what you just stood in front of. I understand exactly what I stood in front of, Amara said, sitting beside him now, her own hands unsteady with adrenaline. A man threatening a child. I've seen worse than him. He could have. But he didn't. She looked at him, really looked at him, and saw for the first time the full shape of what he was carrying. Not just grief, but a war he had been fighting silently since before this flight ever took off. Who are you running from, Mr. Kong? He was quiet for a long moment. Then, because he was tired, because his daughter was finally safe in his arms, because a stranger had just done something no one in his own organization had dared to do, stand between him and danger without being paid or ordered to, he told her the truth. Not all of it, but enough. He told her about the empire he'd inherited, the wife he'd lost, the name inside his own circle he'd discovered was responsible for her death, the flight he'd booked under a false name to try to give his daughter a life outside the only world he'd ever known. He told her he didn't know if he was running towards safety or simply running, and that for the first time in 13 years of controlling everything around him, he had no idea what came next. Amara listened without judgment, the way she had learned to listen to frightened patients delivering babies into uncertain lives, into homes touched by violence or poverty or grief. She did not flinch from what he told her. She did not recoil, the way she suspected he expected her to. "You're not the first man I've met who is trying to outrun what he came from," she said quietly. "But you're the first one I've seen hold his daughter like she was the only reason left to keep breathing." "She is," he said simply. "Then that's where you start," Amara said. "Not with revenge. Not with running. With her." When the plane landed, the danger did not simply vanish. Amara felt at the moment they stepped off the jet bridge, Dae-sung walking a half step ahead, scanning the terminal the way a man scans a room he expects to hold a weapon. Min-ho's arm curled protectively around Sua's carrier, his eyes flicking to every face that lingered a second too long. She told herself she would say goodbye at baggage claim, wish them well, go back to the ordinary shape of her own life. She had a connecting flight to catch. She had a life in Houston that had nothing to do with any of this. She never made it to her gate. At baggage claim, a man in an airport staff vest approached Min-ho's group with a clipboard, asking in accented English to confirm details for a connecting private transfer. Dae-sung stepped forward to answer, and Amara, 3 feet away, still close enough to hear, watched the man's eyes drop for half a second to Sua's carrier, lingering exactly 1 beat too long, in exactly the way a person's eyes linger when they're confirming a target rather than checking a name. "That's not our driver," Min-ho said quietly, not moving his lips, his hand tightening on the carrier's handle. "How do you know?" Amara whispered, surprising herself by staying instead of walking away. "Because I never booked a transfer." What happened next unfolded in under a minute, though it felt to Amara like it stretched much longer. Dae-sung's second man peeling off toward the exit doors, cutting off one route, while Min-ho steered them sharply toward a service corridor usually reserved for airport staff, his voice low and urgent as he apologized to Amara for pulling her along. And she found herself moving anyway, carrier bag bouncing against her hip, because some instinct told her that whatever was happening was bigger than her own schedule, bigger than the flight she was about to miss. They lost the man near a service elevator, ducking into a stairwell that smelled of concrete and jet fuel. Min-ho pressed against the wall with Sua shielded against his chest, breathing hard, more from fear than exertion. "You should go," he said to Amara, once the corridor had gone quiet again. "This isn't your life. You don't owe us anything more than what you already gave us on that plane." "I missed my connection 20 minutes ago," Amara said, and to her own surprise, she wasn't angry about it. "So it seems I'm already a little bit in this." He looked at her for a long moment, something unreadable passing behind his eyes. "The man on the plane, the one who confronted me, he works for someone named Jun-ho." Amara didn't recognize the name, but the way Min-ho said it, the way his jaw tightened around the syllables, told her it meant something enormous. "Jun-ho was my father's second," he said quietly. "He helped raise me in his own way after my father died. He taught me half of what I know about running this life. And 3 weeks ago, I found records showing he was the one who sold Hannah's location to the men who killed her." "Why?" Amara asked, though she already suspected there was no answer that would make it feel less senseless. Money. Fear. Maybe both. Maybe he thought loving someone outside the family made me weak, and he decided to remove the weakness before it cost the organization more than it cost me. He looked down at his daughter, sleeping now against his shoulder despite everything. "I don't know yet. I only know I can't protect her while he's still out there deciding what my family is allowed to have." Amara felt something settle in her chest, not fear exactly, though there was plenty of that too, but a kind of clarity. She had spent her whole career walking into rooms other people ran out of, holding steady when everything around her was falling apart because someone had to be the calm thing in the storm long enough for a life to be saved. She recognized, standing in that stairwell, that she was not going to simply walk away from this one either. Then let's get somewhere safe, she said. And then you figure out how to end this properly. Not by running from it forever. The story that followed in the weeks after was not a simple one. A story of a man untangling himself from a life built on fear, of a betrayal that cut deeper than any outside enemy ever could, and of a woman who found herself pulled fully into a world she never asked to enter, simply because she refused to walk away from a child in danger, and then refused to walk away from the father trying clumsily and desperately to keep that child safe. There were harder nights ahead. Minho relocated Sua to a secure house arranged through contacts who owed him old debts, men outside Junho's reach. He spent long, sleepless weeks gathering the proof he needed. Bank transfers, a recorded phone call, the testimony of a low-level courier who had grown a conscience too late to save Hannah, but not too late to help bring her killer's enabler to justice. Amara, who had told herself again and again that she would leave once she was certain the baby was safe, found reasons to stay a little longer each time. First out of concern for Sua's well-being, then slowly honestly because she had started to care what happened to the tired, guarded man fighting to become someone his daughter could be proud of. There was a night, halfway through those weeks, when Amara almost left for good. It was past midnight, Sua finally asleep, when Minho's phone rang with a number he didn't recognize, and his whole body went rigid in a way that instantly filled the room with tension. He stepped outside to take the call, and when he came back in, his face had drained of color. "They know where we are," he said. "Not exactly, but close enough." "How close?" Amara asked, already moving towards Sua's room out of instinct. "Close enough that we need to move tonight." He raked a hand through his hair, and for the first time since the plane, Amara saw something in him crack open completely. Not the controlled fear he'd shown at 30,000 feet, but raw, unguarded panic. "I keep thinking I've built something safe, and it keeps not being safe, and I don't know how to make it stop. I don't know how to make any of it stop." "Minho!" She said his name plainly, the way she said things to frighten patients in the worst hour of their lives, the tone that cut through panic instead of feeding it. "Look at me. What do we need to do, right now, in the next 10 minutes? He stared at her, and something about the steadiness of the question, not is it going to be okay, not what if we fail, just what do we need to do, gave him something to hold on to. "Pack only what she needs. Nothing that can be traced. We go to Daesung's cousin's place, 2 hours north. It's not permanent. It's just tonight." "Then that's what we do," Amara said, already reaching for the diaper bag, already moving with the calm efficiency of someone who had packed a NICU transport bag under far worse pressure than this. "Tonight we survive. Tomorrow we figure out how to stop surviving and start actually living. One thing at a time." They drove north in silence, broken only by Sua's occasional soft murmurs from her car seat, headlights cutting through a darkness that felt, for the first time since the plane, genuinely dangerous rather than simply uncertain. Amara did not ask if this was going to keep happening. She already suspected the answer, and she suspected that Minho needed, more than reassurance, someone who would not flinch every time the answer was yes. It was in the safe house near dawn. Sua finally resettled, the two of them sitting at a stranger's kitchen table with cold coffee neither of them had touched, that Minho finally said the thing he'd been circling for weeks. "I have enough now. Enough proof about Junho to end this properly, not by hiding from him, but by removing him. I've had it for 3 days. I kept telling myself I needed more, needed to be certain, but the truth is I was afraid of what happens after, what I become, ending this the way it needs to end." "What do you think you become?" Amara asked. "My father," he said quietly. "A man who solves every problem, the only way this life ever taught him to solve them." Amara reached across the table, not touching him, just letting her hand rest near his. "Or you become a man who finally stopped letting someone else decide what kind of father he gets to be. There's a difference between ending something out of fear and ending it so your daughter never has to run in the middle of the night again. You get to choose which one this is." He looked at her for a long moment, and something settled in him. Not certainty, not yet, but the beginning of it. The confrontation with Junho, when it finally came, did not happen the way Minho's old life would have demanded. No violence, no blood on pavement the way his father's story had ended. It happened in a quiet office, with evidence laid on a table, and Min-ho still commanded standing witness. Junho's face going pale as 13 years of pretended loyalty collapsed in front of him. Min-ho did not raise his voice. He did not need to. You taught me that this life eats everything soft in a man, Min-ho said. You were wrong. It only eats the things you let it. And you don't get to decide what I'm allowed to love anymore. Junho was gone from the organization by nightfall, and with him went the last thread tying Min-ho to the version of himself who believed fear and control were the only things that could keep a family safe. But that night, weeks earlier, in the quiet after they'd finally reached the secure house, in a city 3 time zones from where either of their stories had started, Kang Min-ho stood holding his sleeping daughter and turned to the woman who had, in the space of one flight and one terrifying afternoon, quieted his daughter's cries, stood unflinching between his family and a threat that had followed them off an airplane, and chosen again and again not to walk away. I don't know how to thank you, he said. You don't have to, Amara said. You just have to be the father she needs now. That's thanks enough. He nodded, though something in his eyes told her this wasn't goodbye, that whatever had begun in that cabin, in the strange intimacy of shared danger and a baby's trust, was not finished. He was right. Amara stayed 3 more days than she'd planned, telling herself it was only to make sure Sua's routine stayed stable, only to help while Min-ho arranged everything a man on the run has to arrange: new documents, a house with better locks, a life stitched together out of what was left after 13 years of certainty had come apart. 3 days became a week. A week became something neither of them named out loud, though it lived in the space between them anyway, in the way he started asking her opinion before making decisions about Sua, in the way she found herself, unbidden, imagining what her own life might look like if it had room in it for both of them. You could still leave, he told her one evening, watching her rock his daughter to sleep in a kitchen that wasn't yet fully his, in a country that wasn't yet fully home. I would understand. This isn't the life anyone chooses for themselves. No one chose the plane either, Amara said, or the crying, or any of it. I didn't walk down that aisle because I calculated the risk and decided it was worth it. I walked down it because a child was afraid, and I couldn't sit still and let her be afraid alone. She looked up at him. I'm still here for the same reason. Not because I calculated it, because leaving never actually felt like an option, not once I understood what you were both carrying. He was quiet for a long time, the kind of quiet that used to mean danger in his old life, and now, slowly, was starting to mean something else. A man choosing his words carefully because they mattered, not because he was protecting himself. My father used to say that this life eats everything soft in a man, Min-ho said finally. I believed him for 13 years. I built my whole self around not being soft because soft got people killed. It got my father killed. It got his voice caught, and he didn't finish Anna's name, but he didn't need to. I thought loving something meant handing the people who wanted to hurt me a weapon. So I hid it. I hid her, and it didn't save her. It just meant she died not fully knowing how much of myself I'd actually given her, because I was always holding some part back, protecting some part, keeping some door locked even from the person I loved most. And now, Amara asked softly, now I have a daughter who screamed for hours because she could feel that her father was terrified and trying to hide it, he said, and a woman who walked toward danger instead of away from it, for a child that wasn't even hers, because that's simply who she is when no one's asking her to perform courage. It's just what's underneath, all the way down. He met her eyes. I don't want to hide anymore. Not from her. Not from you, if you'll let me stop. Amara didn't answer with words. She reached over, still holding Sua against her shoulder with one arm, and laid her free hand over his. And for the first time since Hannah's death, Kang Min-ho let himself feel something that wasn't grief or fear or the endless calculation of threat and defense. He let himself feel, simply held. It would not be a simple road from there. There were still men from his old life who resented how quietly he had dismantled Junho's influence. Still whispers in circles he no longer fully controlled. Still nights when Min-ho woke certain he'd heard footsteps that weren't there. But he faced those nights differently now, not alone in a locked room calculating odds, but with a daughter down the hall who had learned, somewhere in her first year of life, that safety was something you could feel even before you had words for it, and a woman beside him who had taught him that the softest thing in a person is very often also the strongest. Months later, watching Suah take her first unsteady steps across a sunlit kitchen floor, reaching one hand toward her father and one toward the woman who had once quieted her cries on an airplane and never quite left since, Kang Min-ho understood something his father had gotten backward. This life did not have to eat everything soft in a man. Sometimes the soft thing was exactly what kept the rest of him standing. What Amara didn't know yet, standing in that terminal with a sleeping baby's warmth still remembered on her arms, was that she had just stepped into the middle of a story far bigger than one crying child on one flight. A story about the debts fathers pass down to their children, about the difference between the family you're born into and the family you choose to protect, and about how sometimes the bravest thing a person can do is refuse to look away when everyone else on the plane already had. Some people spend their whole lives waiting for a sign that they matter, that their instincts are worth trusting, that the small, quiet decision to step into someone else's storm might change the entire course of a life. Theirs and someone else's both. Amara never set out to matter to a stranger on a plane. She simply refused to sit still while a child suffered, and in doing so, she became the calm at the center of a storm that was only just beginning. If this story moved you, if you found yourself holding your breath somewhere in the middle of it, let us know in the comments. Tell us the moment that hit you hardest. Like this video if you believe that the smallest acts of courage are sometimes the ones that change everything, and subscribe to the channel so you never miss the next story like this one. There are more journeys waiting. Stories of love found in the most unexpected places, of families rebuilt from the wreckage of the ones that came before them, of ordinary people who chose courage in the moment it mattered most. We'll see you in the next one.